You stand at a funeral and watch a body disappear into the ground. The coffin lowers, the earth closes. It feels like the oldest human act imaginable. But the real answer is much stranger. For most of human existence, the dead did not simply vanish beneath neat stones with names. They remained close, visible, movable, and sometimes useful. Your ancient ancestors buried some bodies, abandoned others, reopened graves, painted bones, carried skulls, burned flesh, removed flesh, and occasionally ate the people they had known. Those actions look unrelated. They may have answered the same impossible problem. A person can stop breathing in a moment, but a relationship does not stop with the body. The living still recognize the face. The mind still predicts the voice. What can be done with someone who is both present and gone? Modern funerals hide that contradiction behind polished wood, trained professionals, and carefully timed ceremonies. Death becomes orderly. Ancient death was physical. It changed color, shape, smell, and location in front of people who had no sealed coffin or distant mortuary. That does not mean ancient people were less sensitive. It means sensitivity had to survive direct contact with decay. The true history of death is not a march from savagery to respect. It is a history of different ways to keep a bond while changing a body. Archaeologists begin with a frustrating limitation. Grief does not fossilize. A tear leaves no layer in the soil. A farewell leaves no cut mark. And a remembered story leaves no bone unless someone turns memory into an object or an action. The science that follows a body after death is called taphonomy. In simple terms, taphonomy asks what happened between death and discovery. Water can move bones. Carnivores can scatter them. Cave roofs can crush them. Soil can preserve one burial and erase 1,000 others. A skeleton curled inside a hollow is therefore not automatically a grave. The hollow might be natural. Sediment might have arrived later. A complete body might have fallen, floated, or been dragged. Intent has to be reconstructed from stubborn material clues. Researchers look for the outline of a cut pit, soil that differs from the surrounding layer, bones still joined in anatomical order, rapid covering before ligaments decayed, unusual body positions, repeated use of one place, pigment, tools, ornaments, or stones placed with care. Even then, certainty has levels. A grave can prove that someone placed and covered a body. It cannot automatically prove belief in an afterlife, religion, love, status, or a spoken ceremony. Those meanings are possible. The dirt does not recite them. This is the first reversal. Ancient graves do not provide a simple birth certificate for human compassion. Care can exist without burial, and burial can happen for practical reasons. A pit protects a body from scavengers and smell. Does practicality cancel grief? Before clear graves appear, certain sites hint that the dead were already treated differently. At Cima de los Huesos in Spain, the remains of many individuals accumulated deep inside a cave around 430,000 years ago. The concentration is extraordinary, but the exact process remains debated. Bodies may have been deliberately placed in the shaft, yet a deliberate deposit is not necessarily a dug grave. That distinction matters. Ancient behavior rarely arrives with a label. Evidence sits on a spectrum from natural accumulation to purposeful placement to formal burial. Another cave makes the spectrum even more provocative. Between roughly 335,000 and 241,000 years ago, bodies of Homo Naledi entered the remote chambers of the Rising Star Cave system in South Africa. Homo Naledi had a brain much smaller than yours. Lee Berger, John Hawks, and colleagues argue that concentrations of articulated remains and surrounding sediments fit intentional burial better than passive decay or natural transport. Their revised work describes bodies covered rapidly and selectively inside features that differ from the cave floor. The claim would push deliberate burial far deeper into time and detach it from a large modern human brain. Yet peer reviewers have judged key parts of the evidence incomplete. The debate is not an embarrassment. It shows how science should handle a spectacular possibility. A dramatic explanation must survive ordinary alternatives. Did sediment slump? Did bodies decompose in shallow depressions? Did later disturbance create an apparent boundary? The answer is still being tested, and uncertainty belongs in the story rather than outside it. Even the undisputed fact is remarkable. Whole bodies reached a dark, difficult cave zone with little evidence of carnivore transport or flooding. Something unusual happened there. The surviving evidence does not reveal every gesture, but it refuses to make death look simple. Clearer burials appear later in several regions, and they do not belong only to Homo sapiens. At Shanidar Cave in Iraqi Kurdistan, Neanderthal remains transformed a cave floor into one of archaeology's most famous arguments about grief. Ralph Solecki excavated multiple Neanderthals there during the 1950s and 1960s. One individual, Shanidar 4, was associated with clumps of pollen. The discovery inspired a powerful image: Neanderthals laying flowers beside their dead. The flower burial became a symbol of tenderness. Then doubt arrived. Burrowing rodents could concentrate flowers or pollen. Insects could carry plant material, and natural processes could imitate a bouquet that no Neanderthal ever arranged. Was the beautiful story too beautiful? New excavations led by Graham Barker and research published by Emma Pomeroy and colleagues changed the question. The team found the articulated upper body of another adult Neanderthal, called Shanidar Z, close to the earlier cluster. The remains lay in a scoop-like depression and had been covered relatively quickly. The head had rested near the left hand, and a rock beside it may have marked the place. Several bodies seem to have occupied nearly the same location across time. That repeated location may matter more than the flowers. Returning to a particular place turns geography into memory. A cave is no longer only shelter. One patch of ground becomes connected to specific absent people. Have you ever felt a place hold someone? Shanidar does not prove a modern funeral. It does suggest that Neanderthals sometimes treated bodies with intention and perhaps returned to a mortuary location. The difference between their minds and yours becomes harder to draw with a clean black line. Farther south, caves in the Levant preserve another transformation. Between roughly 130,000 and 80,000 years ago, different human groups were living, moving, and sometimes burying bodies in the same broad region. The old categories begin to blur. At Tinshemet Cave in present-day Israel, excavators found articulated human remains, abundant stone tools, animal bones, and more than 7,500 pieces of ochre. Ochre is iron-rich earth that can make red, orange, yellow, or purple pigment. A large red ochre piece lay between the legs of one buried individual. Some pigment sources were tens of kilometers away, possibly much farther. Carrying colored stone across a landscape required effort. That effort gave color a value beyond simple availability. The research team argues that shared technologies, pigment use, and burial customs point toward increased interaction and behavioral similarity among Middle Paleolithic human groups. A grave was not only disposal. It could be part of a growing language of objects, places, and color. But ochre is not a single-word translation for ritual. It can preserve hides, repel insects, color bodies, prepare adhesives, or mark surfaces. Context changes meaning. Near a body, it invites a symbolic reading without forcing one. That restraint protects the dead from becoming props in a modern fantasy. Ancient people did not exist to confirm that they were secretly identical to you. Their choices could feel familiar while their explanations remained entirely unreachable. In Kenya, one small grave provides unusually intimate evidence. Around 78,000 years ago, a child about 2.5 to 3 years old was placed inside Panga Saidi cave. Researchers later named the child Mtoto, meaning child in Swahili. Maria Martinon Torres and colleagues studied the fragile remains, the chemistry of the sediment, the microscopic structure of the soil, and the position of the bones. Their conclusion was careful. A pit had been deliberately dug, and the fresh body decomposed inside it. Muto lay on one side with knees drawn toward the chest. The head appears to have rested on a perishable support, something like a pillow that vanished while its effect on the bones remained. An invisible object survived as a position. That is the strange power of archaeology. Soft material disappears, but a tilted skull preserves the empty space it once occupied. Someone may have supported the child's head, covered the body, and left the cave carrying a memory that no instrument can detect. Mtoto is often described as the oldest known deliberate burial of a modern human in Africa. That title does not mean the first African funeral happened on that day. It means older evidence has not yet survived clearly enough to earn the same label. Children appear repeatedly in some of the most elaborate early burials. This fact disrupts an easy theory that grave wealth only rewarded a lifetime of achievement. A young person could receive enormous investment without having hunted, led, invented, or accumulated possessions. Travel north and forward in time to Sunghir, in what is now Russia, around 34,000 years ago. One grave held 2 young individuals placed head to head. Their clothing had been covered with thousands of mammoth ivory beads. Eric Trinkos and Alexandra Buzhalova describe roughly 5,000 beads associated with one youth and around 5,400 with the other. Fox teeth, ivory armbands, pendants, discs, antler objects, and long mammoth ivory spears surrounded them. Each bead had to be cut, shaped, drilled, smoothed, and sewn. Even a cautious estimate turns the grave into thousands of hours of skilled labor. The burial consumed time that could have made clothing, repaired shelter, or prepared food. Why spend it on the dead? The simplest answer is that the objects were not merely gifts purchased for a funeral. Many beads appear to have belonged to clothing worn in life. Death gathered identity, craftsmanship, and social relationships into one spectacular arrangement. Ancient DNA adds another twist. Martin Sikora and a large research team sequenced genomes from several Sunghir individuals. The two youths buried together were not close biological relatives, despite the visual intimacy of their shared grave. Biology did not fully dictate social closeness. A community could bind people through identities that genes alone cannot explain. The grave makes kinship look less like a family tree and more like a network of obligations, stories, roles, and chosen attachments. An adult human femur, stripped of its ends and filled with ochre, was also placed beside the youths. A person had become both ancestor and object, or perhaps something that modern categories cannot name. One body could join another burial in pieces. This is where the familiar image of a complete corpse in a sealed grave begins to fail. Ancient mortuary treatment often had stages. A body might be exposed, allowed to decay, revisited, separated, cleaned, painted, moved, displayed, and only later deposited. Archaeologists call some of this secondary burial. The phrase simply means that final placement happened after an earlier treatment or location. The dead could have a journey rather than a single funeral. Which moment counted as goodbye? Exposure does not necessarily mean abandonment. Leaving a body in the open can be a deliberate rite when a community understands animals, weather, and decomposition as agents of transformation. Without written testimony, exposed bodies are also among the hardest practices to recognize. A buried skeleton has a chance to remain together. An exposed body may scatter into soil, nests, rivers, and animal stomachs. Archaeology therefore overrepresents practices that preserve bones neatly. The apparent dominance of burial may partly be a trick of survival. Fire creates another filter. Cremation can reduce a person to cracked fragments that are easy to disperse and difficult to identify. Yet controlled burning requires fuel, attention, and knowledge. Destruction of the body can demand more labor than preservation. The same action can carry opposite meanings. Fire can purify, release, conceal, protect, punish, or simply reduce a dangerous corpse. A modern observer sees ash. Ancient participants may have seen a transition unfolding in heat, smell, sound, and light. Then comes the practice most likely to trigger a modern moral alarm. Some ancient people cut human bodies in ways that resemble animal butchery. Certain bones were broken for marrow. Some skulls were shaped into containers. In a few cases, human tissue was eaten. At Gough's cave in southwest England, remains dating to about 14,700 years ago bear unusually clear evidence. Sylvia Bello and colleagues examined cut marks, percussion damage, tooth marks, and the carefully modified edges of cranial vaults. More than 65% of the studied human bones carried cut marks in one analysis. Some joints were separated, muscles removed, and long bones broken. Human tooth marks appeared on fragments. The treatment closely resembled processing of large animals from the cave. 3 crania had been meticulously worked into skull cups. Soft tissue was removed, the face and base were separated, and the broken rim was carefully chipped into a more regular edge. This was not random smashing during a desperate meal. The evidence supports consumption, but consumption alone does not explain the precision. Later work identified an engraved zigzag on a human arm bone, produced within the wider process of mortuary treatment. Food, craft, memory, and ritual may have occupied the same event. The word cannibalism creates an image of enemies, frenzy, and horror because popular stories train that response. Bones cannot always tell whether the consumed person was hated, honored, feared, or loved. Eating can erase an enemy. It can also incorporate a relative. Starvation cannibalism, violent cannibalism, and funerary cannibalism are not interchangeable. The physical traces can overlap, while context changes the likely explanation. At Gough's cave, repeated skilled processing and skull cup manufacture suggest culturally structured behavior rather than a moment without rules. This does not make the act harmless or sentimental. It makes it social. People knew what to cut, what to break, what to preserve, and how to shape it. A disturbing practice can still be careful. Does care always have to look gentle? Modern disgust is not a neutral detector of ancient meaning. It is a learned boundary that tells you what counts as a person, what counts as food, and when a body becomes untouchable. Other cultures have drawn those boundaries differently. Your own society also transforms dead bodies through acts that would look alarming without context. An embalmer drains fluids and replaces them with chemicals. A surgeon removes organs. A cremator burns tissue and pulverizes remaining bone. Context turns each act into care. Strip away the building, uniform, paperwork, and shared explanation, and the physical procedure becomes strange. Ancient treatment deserves the same contextual discipline. The question is not whether the act resembles a modern funeral. The question is what pattern the evidence supports. Cut marks made soon after death differ from scratches caused by sediment. Human chewing differs from carnivore gnawing. Repeated blows can reveal marrow extraction. Polished or retouched edges can show that a bone became an object after it stopped being anatomy. This careful reading prevents two opposite mistakes. One mistake calls every modified body a victim of savage violence. The other calls every unusual deposit sacred ritual. Real evidence often supports a narrower answer. People intentionally transformed the remains, but their full reason is unknown. Why transform a corpse at all? Begin with the body as a biological problem. A dead person attracts insects and scavengers, releases odor, and changes rapidly. Groups living near a death had to act, especially in warm environments or enclosed shelters. Practical pressure, however, cannot explain every choice. The easiest disposal is rarely thousands of beads. Repeated cave placement, distant pigment, careful skull shaping, or a support beneath a child's head. Extra effort is evidence of value, even when the type of value remains uncertain. The deeper problem exists inside the living brain. Your nervous system builds models of familiar people. It predicts their footsteps, expressions, habits, and replies. Death removes the person faster than those predictions can disappear. A voice seems ready to sound in the next room. A face appears in a crowd. A hand reaches for a message that cannot be answered. Those modern experiences expose an ancient mismatch. Knowledge says absent, while the social brain keeps expecting presence. Mortuary actions give that mismatch a structure. Washing, wrapping, painting, watching, carrying, burying, burning, or dividing remains turns an uncontrollable biological change into a sequence with participants, rules, and an ending. Ritual does not need to begin as abstract theology. Repetition itself can stabilize attention and emotion. A prescribed action answers the unbearable question of what to do next. Once shared, that action becomes teachable. Once teachable, it can become tradition. Traditions also make groups visible to themselves. The way a community treats the dead can announce who belongs, who holds status, which place matters, and which objects carry identity. A grave can be about the living without being insincere about the dead. Sunghir's beads displayed labor and connection. Shanidar's repeated location may have anchored memory. Tinshamet's pigment participated in a shared visual world. Mtoto's careful position preserved attention to one small body. Different acts solved overlapping problems. Mortuary behavior could also support territorial claims. Returning ancestors to a cave or landscape ties social memory to land. The dead cannot move away or negotiate, but their presence can make a place feel inherited. A grave is sometimes a map written with a body. It can preserve inequality too. Some people receive elaborate treatment while others leave little trace. That difference may reflect rank, circumstance, identity, manner of death, age, or archaeological luck. Rich graves reveal selection, not an average funeral. Sunghir proves the warning. Its dazzling burials are famous precisely because they are exceptional. Eric Trinkhaus and colleagues emphasize diversity even within the site. One arrangement cannot stand for every person living across Ice Age Eurasia. The same caution applies to absence. A population with no discovered graves did not necessarily ignore its dead. Exposure, water disposal, tree placement, cremation, or repeated movement can become nearly invisible after thousands of years. No grave is not the same as no grief. Even emotion should not be simplified. Grief can coexist with fear, anger, relief, hunger, obligation, and political display. Ancient people were not symbols of purity. They lived inside relationships as complicated as any relationship available to you. The strongest evidence, therefore, describes behavior before belief. A pit was cut, a body was flexed, a head was supported, pigment was transported, a location was reused, bones were defleshed, a rim was shaped, beads were sewn. From those verbs, cautious possibilities emerge. The dead retained social significance. Bodies could become symbols, possessions, substances, landmarks, or links between people. Death changed a person's social form instead of instantly deleting it. That may be the real answer hiding beneath every method. Ancient humans did not have one universal funeral. Because death creates more than one problem. There is a corpse to manage, an absence to understand, a bond to redirect, a group to reorganize, and a memory to place somewhere. Burial solves some of those problems by making absence visible. A mound says the person is here and not here. Exposure makes transformation visible. Cremation accelerates it. Bone keeping lets a fragment remain. Consumption moves the boundary inside the living body. None of these acts can be ranked on a simple ladder from primitive to civilized. Each depends on a shared world of meanings. When that world disappears, only the physical action remains, and the action can look monstrous, tender, practical, or all three at once. Your world has not escaped the pattern. Photographs preserve faces, names are carved into stone. Ashes sit on shelves or travel to favorite landscapes. Digital accounts continue producing birthday reminders after death. The person becomes object, place, image, and signal. Modern technology changes the material, not the contradiction. A phone can preserve thousands of messages, yet it cannot produce one new reply. The dead remains socially present through traces, just as an ochre-covered bone or familiar cave once held a relationship in altered form. This is why arguments about ancient burial feel personal. The evidence presses on a boundary that protects a comforting story about human uniqueness. If Neanderthals buried bodies, if Homo Naledi deliberately placed them, or if cannibalism could be funerary, familiar categories collapse. The dead are not only evidence for when humans became modern, they expose how unstable the word modern really is. Compassion does not require a coffin. Symbolism does not require writing. Complexity does not always leave a beautiful object. The next time you watch a coffin lower, the scene may no longer feel like a timeless default. It is one answer among many, shaped by law, religion, industry, sanitation, memory, and the expectations of the people standing nearby. Beneath that polished ritual sits the same ancient task. A living mind must convert someone from expected presence into lasting absence without destroying the relationship completely. The body changes first. The bond changes slowly. Ancient humans placed that change in earth, caves, fire, pigment, beads, bones, and sometimes their own bodies. They did not simply dispose of the dead. They gave death a sequence that the living could survive. You stand at a funeral and watch a body disappear into the ground. Now the earth does not look like the oldest answer. It looks like only one way to keep someone close while finally letting the body go.